Awesome. Well, I'm going to go ahead and jump right in. It's been the end of a long day, and I'm sure we all want to get right in. So my name is Zane Turner. I'm a developer evangelist with Salesforce, and I'm happy that you're here joining me to talk about Salesforce DX, the app development lifecycle, and you. And of course, before we get too deep into this, I have to show you the most exciting slide that we all see all the time to remind you to make purchasing decisions based on the awesome technology we have today, not any awesome technology we may or may not deliver tomorrow. And I want to talk about who you are real quickly. So who in this general area that wants to raise a hand has ever deployed changes to production? All right. Who has used change sets to deploy changes? Who uses packaging? OK, a few hands. Who uses the metadata API to deploy? Who says, we have a metadata API? All right, there we go. All right, everyone is welcome. So there are lots of ways that we manage changes in our orgs, right? We know that we start with an idea, and then eventually we hope somehow it ends up in production. And to do that, we use a lot of different environments to get there. And that's pretty much exclusively sandboxes today, right? And we do a lot of building in those different environments. We code and we do declarative stuff, and hopefully somewhere in there we test. And depending on your life cycle, that might be happening between several different environments. And of course, to get those changes here, there, and everywhere, we use a variety of vehicles. And with Salesforce DX, we're hoping to solve some challenges. And what are those challenges? Well, so we have all of this going on, and it's great. But what happens when you have two different teams building on the same object? Has that ever happened to anyone before? Maybe once or twice. What happens when you have two different teams building on the same object, building on the same 7 objects, but they don't share a single sandbox? Has that ever happened to anybody? Yeah, exactly. So we have challenges with conflicts between environments. If I'm working on the case object and you're working on the case object, whose changes win when we deploy to a different environment and accidentally overwrite? Or if we're doing development work in one sandbox and we're testing in another, and it's a simple, small change to make, do I have to always make the change in the same sandbox and promote it every time? Maybe I'll just go in and make the change here. And then now we have a moving target that has the latest version of our build. And then I know that I'm the only one in this space that this has ever happened to, but sometimes deployments aren't perfect. And sometimes you get a partial deployment. Sometimes you get everything except that compact layout. Sometimes you get everything except that field level security, right? So there's even inconsistencies, environment to environment. And then this is leading up to the overall pattern. There's no one place that we know is our source of truth, except maybe production, right? Because that's where we have to end up eventually. But as you're building a feature, your source of truth might just be the sandbox that has the latest stable build, right? And that's a hard thing to manage. So Salesforce DX is offering a different model. So this is like the full meal deal right here, okay? There's a lot going on, and this is like the end game in a perfect world. We have a new paradigm. We have a new way of managing changes and thinking about how we're not only building those changes in, but moving them between environments and keeping a record of what's been released, right? And this is the Salesforce DX long-term vision. And you've probably seen this slide once or twice today, and you'll continue seeing it as we talk about this. But the big change here is that thing in the middle, is that version control or source control becomes your source of truth. And that's a shift from maybe the way those of us that are used to thinking about org to org movement are used to managing change. So let's look at how we get here. So teams at Salesforce, I am not a part of that team, I just work with them. Teams at Salesforce are building features and tools to help get us to this vision of managing changes in a more cohesive manner. So we have the Salesforce CLI. Who's heard ever used the Salesforce CLI? We got a few hands. It's a command line interface, hence the CLI part of the name. It's a tool that you can use to programmatically do things in orgs, and you can use it with any org. You can use it with a sandbox, production org, developer org, scratch org, which we're going to get to in a second. You can move stuff between orgs, you can introspect orgs, you can run queries, execute tests, all kinds of things from the command line. It's a baseline tool there for you to help do things. We've also delivered a framework along with the CLI so that you can write your own plugin to the IDE of your choice. We've also written some other plugins so that you can use things like Visual Studio Code. Vendors like IntelliJ have written plugins for you to use their products with the CLI. And there's also language services now built in all behind this so that we get nice things like, I'm in my IDE, and I'm starting to type out that flexi pages : available for something, 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 and you get that completion, that IntelliSense that it's nice to work in a language and have. So we're building in a baseline of awareness, so no matter what tool you want to use, you're going to be able to do more. And we're also building in a new kind of development org. Who's used a Scratch org? Okay, I see a couple hands. Who's at least heard of a Scratch org? Okay, so Scratch orgs are temporary development environments. So who's had to think of an idea, and then you go into the sandbox and you build it, and you totally screwed up a teammate's work? Just me? No, I'm seeing some nods. Okay, Scratch orgs are the way that you avoid that kind of thing. It's your environment for your building. They can last anywhere from 0 to 30 days and no longer. You can't hold on to them forever and, oh, just, maybe clone this one, because the idea is you use it, figure out what you needed to figure out, and then get rid of it. They're temporary orgs. They're ephemeral, and that's why they're called a Scratch org. You spin one up, do what you need, and get rid of it. We've also delivered debugging and testing services available to you through the CLI. So no longer having to go back into the setup menu, hit create a log, set your filter levels, run your thing, maybe copy and paste the log into a text file. Nobody's ever done that. You can pull down those logs and create those logs from the command line. It's now new features in the CLI. You can also kick off testing in the CLI, which is all leading to then letting you use more automated tools. If you can physically type a command in the command line, then why can't you use Travis or Jenkins to script it for you? That's sort of the long-term vision there. The more functionality that comes to these tools under the platform, the less you have to, as a human, sit there and do it. The other thing that we have is now in spring, we have a beta that lets you clone sandboxes. So if your app development lifecycle relies very heavily on particularly configured sandboxes, we're giving you more options even around that. You don't have to say, oh, we're only using Scratch orgs, we're only using sandboxes. DX is all about choice. And in spring, we now have unlocked packaging in beta. On the last slide, I noticed it. Packaging fell off the bottom of the slide there, even when we were talking about challenges. And that wasn't intentional, but I could have said it was, because packages up to now had really only been available for people who were building as ISVs or app exchange partners, and you have packaging orgs. Sometimes we might use an unmanaged package to move things, but it wasn't a way that a lot of us were developing. With unlocked packages, also formerly called developer-controlled packages, it's turning over the control of how you pull together your metadata and how you release that metadata as a unit to more of us. And it's a different way of organizing changes in your org. So it's one thing for Salesforce to build these tools, but it's another thing for you to use these tools. Because how you're going to adopt DX and what your org's DX actually looks like depends on you. Are you ever going to use source control? Do you use it now? Do you have a deployment management system that's not human beings? Is it always going to be human beings? Do you want to use packages? Do you want to keep using change sets? All of these decisions are the kind of things that you're going to need to start having conversations about with your company, with people who are comfortable working in the command line, with people who are only comfortable working declaratively. right? It's a lot to think about. But the thing is that no matter what decisions your company makes, maybe based on regulatory environments, based on purchases you've already made, there's not necessarily a right or wrong. It's just going to be a mix that looks right for your company. So how this complete picture gets filled in starts with you skilling up on DX. So how do you do that? I'm jumping ahead of my own slides. So how do you get started? What a great question, Zane. There's a lot of resources on Trailhead. There's even 2 new resources that we see right over there about unlocked packages if you want to explore them. So you can go get hands-on with Trailhead. And you'll learn how to install the CLI, how to get the dependencies on your machine to run the CLI, how to start building. What does this mean for app development and management? What is source control with the Git and GitHub basics? What does it require? What skills will I need? And if you want to have something to read, something to help you figure out more questions to ask with your company, my colleagues on developer evangelism and I went with the product managers for DX and built a 5-part series for you. That bit.ly link right there is to the part 1 series where you can get everything, where we talk about, well, what is DX? Break down all of the terms and the tools again. And then we go all the way through, well, what if I like this thing and I want to start doing automated scripting? And what if I want to go all the way to continuous deployment and continuous integration? So it's a large part of the series, and we're going to keep adding to it, especially as we start talking about things like unmanaged packaging and some of the other enhancements coming in the future. So check out that link. And as you're here at Salesforce DX, you can continue to go to sessions like this one that have more to do with DX. So these are all the different sessions here that are going to be talking about DX. We have sandboxes tomorrow in change management, and they're going to be talking about source-driven development tomorrow as well. And so I think with that, I left a lot of time for Q&A if people have questions. So I don't know if I have a mic passer or a rounder, but if people have questions, yeah. Yeah, so the question was, is this a feature that's already accessible for everyone? So there are parts of DX that are available for everybody. And I'll jump back to that slide so you can see. So the parts of DX that are available now are right here. We have the Salesforce CLI is a tool you can download. Scratch orgs are a kind of development environment that you can use once you turn on Dev Hub functionality. So a lot of these features are available today. Some of them, as you can see, in beta. Yep. Yeah, and that Getting Started series that I mentioned goes through what the steps you'll need, as does Trailhead, to say these are exactly all the things you'll need to do to get started. That's a great question. So the question is, are Scratch orgs always clean, or can I bring over some of my stuff into the Scratch orgs? So what you do when you're creating a Scratch org is you're going to create a Scratch org definition file. And with that definition file, sorry, my mic passer or rounder just came. Thank you, Renee. So the Scratch org definition file, it's going to be written in JSON. And you're going to have a list of features that you want to turn on. Like my org has Sales Cloud and Service Cloud. I can turn that on in my Scratch org. We have multi-language and multi-currency and territory management 2.0 turned on. You can do a lot of that in the Scratch org definition file. The team is also working to allow you to do things like say, this Scratch org is based on this production org. Please copy over the features and licenses of that org. Now, when I say features, I don't mean my Apex class, right? My custom special object with my 7 custom fields. I mean my org that has increased API limits, communities, and these other licenses. So that flexibility to make your Scratch org more match production is coming. But part of the power of Scratch orgs is that you could say, well, what would it be like for our company if we turned on Service Cloud? You can do that with a Scratch org without having to go talk to your AE and say, can we please maybe turn on Service Cloud for like a minute and a half to like see this thing? So there, you want some flexibility there. Yeah, so the CLI, so the question was, can I bring my code over? How do I do that thing? Yeah, thank you, Renee. So there are more ways to deploy built into the CLI already. So if you're working with a Scratch org, there's some different ways of moving those changes that have to do with the force, source, and then push and pull commands. You'll see that in the developer docs. And that's about specifically moving stuff to and from your Scratch org from, say, your local machine. But the CLI does also let you get at those metadata deployments. So you can pull down a package, XML, and deploy it with the CLI. Yep. We got another one right there.
Hey, if you're only doing declarative work, just
Yep. clicks
and not code, is Salesforce DX using Scratch orgs and all that, is that useful or overkill? Is it something that somebody that doesn't know any code could take advantage of?
So my colleague Peter Chittum just had a session about if you can write a formula field, you can use the command line. Right now, the tools of DX are mostly exposed through the CLI. So if that's something that you're willing to give a try at learning, you can get at it now. If you're not, it's a good space to keep your eye on it, but it's not exactly going to be the most accessible for you. The team is working on functionality to make it more declarative. That is coming, so it won't be this way forever. Yep. Any questions? Cool. Well, thanks for joining me, and have a great TDX, everyone.